Welcome to the Behind the Grantmakers Curtain series. This collection of interviews with different foundations aims to help grant seekers craft more effective grant proposals that win funding. This series is brought to you by Instrumentl, the institutional fundraising platform. If you're looking to bring grant prospecting, tracking, and management to one place, you can do so with Instrumentl. On average, nonprofits apply for 78% more grants within a year, helping them win more grants. To do the same and find new good fit funders for your nonprofit, try Instrumentl 14 days free by visiting www.instrumentl.com. That's www.instrumentl.com. Now, let's jump into today's show.
Today's conversation features the Community Research and Grants Management Officer at the Columbus Foundation, one of the top 10 largest community foundations in the United States. In this conversation, we explore a variety of topics, including what it means for grants to become more accessible from the side of grant makers to grant seekers, as well as other conversations like what you need in your program in order to match the needs of the funder and what they are looking to fund. We also discuss some of the boots on the ground and overall efforts that the Columbus Foundation has taken to make grants more accessible to grassroots foundations in their community. This is a great perspective to learn from a community foundation who has really taken it upon themselves to make partnership a two-way street. The Columbus Foundation strives to assist donors and others in the Central Ohio community by strengthening and improving their community for the benefit of all its residents. It's one of the 10 largest community foundations in the United States. That's why I'm so excited today to introduce Danielle Tong, who is the Community Research and Grants Management Officer at the Columbus Foundation. In this role, Danielle researches, reviews, and recommends grants and strategies for a broad spectrum of community needs designed to strengthen and improve the community. She also leads the Foundation's delivery of capacity building initiatives, helping nonprofit leaders. She deploys her experience with evaluation and measurement to aid in the Foundation's strategic grant making for a variety of donor interest areas across Central Ohio. Danielle, welcome to the show. I'm so excited to have you here today. And just to kick things off, I'd love for you to tell us more about your foundation. What is your foundation's origin story, and who do you aim to fund today?
Okay, so the foundation, the Columbus Foundation, is a 75-year-old foundation that was founded during the Depression and towards the end of war times, and was really the expression of a commitment to do good by the residents of Columbus at that time. It was very small. It was just a collection of folks who wanted to pool together the resources they have to better their community, very much in the way that we see our smaller organizations right now, started that way. Who we aim to fund, being that we are a community foundation, our funding, our funders, our grantees are diverse. And we like to say that we fund from arts to zoos and really anything in between. We definitely do listen to the voice of our donors and their passions, and also the voice of our community and their needs.
I love that saying, from arts to zoos. When you dig into describing your grant making strategy, how do you listen to your donors and align those to those interest areas? Since I know that that's something you work with on a daily basis.
So we have two separate departments that support our donors, one that supports our donors, and the department that I'm in, Community Research and Grants Management, that supports understanding community needs, building relationships with our grantees and our larger community. And then we work with the opportunity to pair donors with existing community needs. And so it is a cyclical relationship. And we are really trying to lay the tracks for that relationship to be between the donor and the community, so that we're able to feed those needs back to our donor base.
Yeah, and that's something we talked about before we got started today, which is just your emphasis on actually building grassroots relationships. I'd love for you to speak more on that and how you guys have adopted certain philosophies or principles that guide you in building those relationships today.
So the Columbus Foundation has always recognized the value of our small nonprofits and the safety net that they build for our community members. But I think as a field, philanthropy has not figured out exactly how to reach those nonprofits, how to access them and provide accessibility to funding and philanthropy. So we've really emphasized our work in outreach. And by outreach, I mean literal boots on the ground, going out to small nonprofits, emerging organizations, and saying, how can I directly help you? I think that for a long time, philanthropy has really hung a shingle and said, hey, we're open for business. But they haven't done the groundwork of reaching out to orgs and saying, but what is the best inroads for you? And so that's really the work that we're trying to do right now, which is meeting an organization where it's at and finding out exactly what those targeted needs are, and then working with those needs.
How do you think that changed in the most recent year, since obviously last year had a huge impact on everybody? Do you think that accelerated what you guys were already moving towards in this sort of grassroots effort? Or was it kind of, something that you had already been working on and it was already a core focus for you guys?
So I think that the multiple things have accelerated that. So our nation's racial reckoning, Columbus has had a very similar kind of racial reckoning. And we've had our own kind of things that we've had to deal with within the city. And also the result of COVID on our community and on communities at large, and looking at the disparate impact of that disease on various community members. So that has certainly accelerated the work that we've done. Because what we know is that grassroots nonprofits are generally led by, a large number of those are led by people of color. And so really allowing the door to open for those organizations, just by providing the accessibility for small nonprofits, you automatically diversify the types of grantees that you have.
Mm-hmm. And I'd love for you to speak more about the nature of more unrestricted support grants. How has that impacted the idea behind those, with COVID in the last year and continuing on right now, and the impacts to the local communities? How have you noticed different shifts in terms of how folks have approached the thoughts around unrestricted support grants?
So that's a really beautiful question, because general operating support was important prior to the pandemic. It's been important, but I think that we as the funders are just seeing the fruit of that right now. And so part of capacity building is that general operating support. It's making room for a nonprofit to have the freedom that they need to fulfill their mission, whatever that may be. So the Columbus Foundation has a definite commitment to seeing those general operating needs and funding those. And while I don't think that was necessarily a new thing for the Columbus Foundation, it is certainly reinvigorated based on the effect of COVID and the racial reckonings that we've experienced.
It seems like something super important to the Columbus Foundation is that relationship building component. So I'd love to shift gears a little bit and talk more on that point from your experiences of how grassroots as well as established nonprofits can actually meaningfully build relationships with grant makers like yourselves. Since I know it's a common question that always comes up is, should I call them? Should I email them? What is the best way to actually begin a meaningful relationship with a foundation like you guys?
So I really can't speak to other organizations and what is the best inroads for those. I wish that I could say that make it easy, and for all grant makers, it looks this way. For the Columbus Foundation, our inroads is twofold: through applying and through participation. So we definitely get to know our organizations. If we come across an application of an org that we have not had exposure to, we invest much more time in getting to know that organization. And that's really the inroads for us. The other way is through participation in various opportunities that we have that come up. So we provide continuing education opportunities, networking, et cetera. We have what we call grant open houses, which have been postponed during COVID, but will return as soon as it's safe to convene. to give folks an opportunity to come into the foundation and meet us in person and give us an understanding of what they do and who they are. So those are the two ways that I think are best to interact with us, though we do field calls and emails. We get a lot of them, so that makes those types of communications more challenging just to parse out things. So I always like to tell people the front door to the Columbus Foundation is an application to a grant cycle.
Got it. That's also great to hear that you guys have so many different initiatives for grant seekers as well. And for our listeners, whenever you see a foundation that has those open houses and whatnot, those are great signals to you that they are likely very much open to hearing from new, grassroots nonprofits, as well as even established nonprofits that might just be seeking need in that particular funding cycle and whatnot. That's something that I know, has been a big focus from the grant making side of things, and it should only continue in the years to come as well. When we talk about the nature of relationship building, I think it's often something that can feel a little bit like a black box, even when saying something along the lines of like just submitting an application, right? If you are not ready yet to submit an application, what are your guys' typical, best tips for nonprofits that are just kind of gearing up in their grant writing strategy, or just in general with their capacity to write grants? What general thoughts do you have for folks like those?
So for us, that was the utility of our grant open houses. So we really encourage folks, if they have questions about the grant process or they have questions about their program, to certainly call us, email us, attend those open houses, and bring those questions to us in advance. The other thing I will say is that our team does an excellent job of seeing an application, but also seeing the program behind the application. So there's a lot of fear around like how to write a grant, which I think is, it makes a lot of sense. You want to on paper build your best that you can possibly build. We really try to look past that into the program that is being proposed and the need that the program is looking to fill in the community. So, if you, for some reason, feel like you don't have the best writing skills, or you're new at this, certainly just giving it a shot will be really important. So, and I say that because, we serve a lot of immigrant serving organizations, and those organizations, we want them to be run by people with a lived experience. We serve a lot of organizations that work with people for whom English is their second language. And we want people who have that lived experience to be leading those organizations. And we don't want to be, causing any harm to those orgs by just looking simply at the grant application. So for us, it's really, really about the program being proposed. And if you feel that you can't adequately get to that in a grant application, please do reach out before you apply and have a talk.
And I'd love for you to dig into that on the point around programs and the importance of the program. What makes a strong program, or how do the effective applications that come through communicate that clearly to you guys versus the ones where it potentially is a little bit more difficult for you guys as the foundation to identify what the program's impact is in the community and whatnot?
So we look at what our pressing community needs are at the time. And so we see so many impressive programs, so many beautifully designed, astounding programs that are very important to the populations that they serve. And so it's not really a matter of building a program that matches exactly what we're looking for. It's really about what needs are being met in the community at the time. For example, I'm sure this is true for a lot of other community foundations that you've talked to, responsiveness to COVID-19, and not just in the sense that, our program has pivoted to become responsive, but what exactly are you doing? So Are you meeting mental health needs during COVID, which has been something that's been blocked? Are you, providing accessibility to vaccines to a population that seems to have a low vaccination rate? And if you're doing those things, those are the things we're looking at. The other thing that is, I think, nationally kind of a crisis, but Columbus is experiencing it as well, is violence. So upswells of violence and violent crime activity. So is your organization somehow serving the population of folks that are likely to commit violence or are supporting victims of crime? We're looking at those things. So it's not really about designing the perfect application. It's really about the program and how it meets the needs of the community.
And when you're speaking about those shifting priorities based on, where you guys are and your immediate needs, what's the best way for an organization who might be working on a program that doesn't relate to those direct funding needs to stay in touch with you guys for that next opportunity when potentially, for example, an arts organization that can't directly impact, the vaccination side of things, what is the best way for them to continue to build the relationship with you guys, stay on your radar, and be relevant for that next cycle when there is going to be a shift in the priorities in the community?
Absolutely. So first, I want to say that we have a dedicated arts cycle with a dedicated arts reviewer, which is not me. And so those organizations have certainly not been neglected during the pandemic, and they have seen some serious financial hits. So we have not neglected the arts at all, but I will say that the best way for a nonprofit to kind of keep in the loop with us is, again, twofold. Certainly reaching out and having those conversations, but we have an entire list of all possible grant opportunities on our website, along with the criteria that each of those grants that apply to each of those grant opportunities. So what I absolutely think makes my job easier is when a nonprofit, they call and say, I saw this on the website. Here are the things that I'm thinking about. And here's the program that I'm thinking about applying to. Do you think this is a good match? Is this really a good time for this? Because it really helps narrow the scope of what they should and shouldn't be doing at the time. Is that helpful?
Yeah, that is super helpful. That actually directly aligns to one of our grant writing workshops where one of our trainers also shared that same tidbit, in which just having that initial screening question and sharing what you're working on, what you're planning to do before you actually start investing the time and your limited bandwidth towards that application is one of the best ways to kind of filter down on your list of opportunities. It sounds like it all goes back to what you were saying earlier. It starts with the application for you guys. And so for folks listening as well, it's the columbusfoundation.org, columbusfoundation.org is where you'll be able to access those opportunities as well. I'm curious, when we dig into actually the application side of things, if you can speak a little bit more towards some of the most common mistakes that you find applicants make when it comes to applying to you guys. I know, reading instructions is obviously a big one for a lot of folks, but I'm curious if there's something else that comes to mind when you think about the things that you guys receive on a daily basis.
Okay, so first I want to go back to clarify. So columbusfoundation.org without the, which you definitely said. And if you're looking for the list of possible opportunities, you'll want to look in the tab called the Nonprofit Center. There's a wealth of information in that area about all of the different activities. So you'll see capacity building efforts, nonprofit forum workshops happening in there. Our grant open house deadlines are listed in there. An opportunity to sign up for what we call the Giving Store, which is our essentially like Amazon for our nonprofits. Folks can have an easy time just donating $100 to a nonprofit, something like that. You'll find that list there. And to get to your next question, this was I think this is always the most difficult question for me to answer. What are some common mistakes folks make? And I think it's because of the way that we review applications. There isn't like a mistake that people make that we can say that this is the critical error, which is the reason why this was not funded. I think the biggest the biggest thing for us is if you are a new program, new to applying to the cycle that you're applying for, definitely reach out to one of our grant officers, because critical errors are, I think that maybe the only error would be like not filling out the application or filling it out significantly too leanly, which I have not seen. Most people provide far more information than we need, which is fine. We're happy to wade through it because it's better than not getting enough. We, on our end, are working hard to make the applications more intuitive to the applicant. So the questions, targeted questions to things that we specifically want answers to, so that an applicant doesn't feel like they have to write, a novel in order to make sure everything's in there. But if you feel like you need to write a novel, write the novel, because we will take it and we'll sift through it and it'll be fine.
Before we head into the second portion of today's conversation with Danielle Tong from the Columbus Foundation, we wanted to tell you about Instrumentl. Instrumentl helps grant seekers bring grant prospecting, tracking, and management to one place. If you'd like to give Instrumentl a try, you can create a free account at www.instrumentl.com and get personalized grant recommendations for your nonprofit. In the case where you're ready to upgrade your account, you can save $50 off your first month by using the code Foundation50. Nonprofits that use Instrumentl increase their grant applications by 78% within a year of using us. Now, back to the episode. When you think about the most memorable grant applications you guys have received in the last year or so, what stands out, and what do you think makes those particular applications stand out for when it arrived into your guys's feed?
Mm-hmm. So a lot of our very memorable, again, I feel like I keep saying the same thing, and I'm sorry for that, but a lot of our most memorable, or the applications that we read, that we funded, that were just like, oh, that feels good, are things that we knew were targeted towards a specific need. For example, Ohio has a staggering infant mortality rate. And in specific, the disparity between Black and white moms, and moms of color even, and white moms is very, very pressing. And so we being able to fund organizations that target that specific thing it feels really good. We've been able to do that. We've also been able to fund some small organizations that are boots on the ground in our effort to stem violence. And that feels really good because we know those orgs are doing work that we don't even have the capability to do ourselves, and any way that we can partner with them feels really good. Other orgs that had other things that have felt really good. We received a request for a parking lot, which doesn't always sound super exciting for folks, but this was because of an expansion of a program, which is just rare. It's a drug and alcohol substance use disorder partial hospitalization program. And without getting into too much technicalities, those are very rare programs with very few slots available across the country. And the opportunity to host a program like that here in Columbus is a 1 in a million shot. And what this org needed was a parking lot to accommodate the expansive growth that they were going to experience because of this program. And so we feel very proud about that funding choice as well.
I think what all of that really speaks to is it comes back to the program. Like, even aside from the application, it's always the central point on what the program's impact is going to be on the community, and centralizing around that behind the funding. When it comes to renewing grants with people that have previously received grants from the foundation before. Is there a different process for those returning grantees? Do you guys review those in any different way than the new grantees? And how important are grant reports in your evaluation as to whether or not to renew funding to determine future grants that are coming out for the upcoming funding cycles?
So it depends largely on what you're applying for. Again, because we're a community foundation, we have community foundations are a little bit like banks with lots of different accounts, and each account has a different, access point. And those are based on donor intent. So some of them require applications every year, even if you're new or if you're the same org applying last year, it's the same process. Some do not require that. Some are multi-year grants, which is something I think we should talk about as well. So it depends on what you're applying for. As a reviewer, though, we try to make sure that we are the access point for our orgs. And so if we read an application from this org before, then we're the reviewer again in the future. We're the contact point for that org. And quite typically, we've had a lot of contact with the organization across the grant period. So nothing in that application should be a surprise to us. And that speaks to your final report question. We do have final reports. Typically, nothing in those final reports are of huge surprise to us. But I will say that we are going through an effort right now to revamp not only the final report, but the application to collect more demographic information from our grantees so that we know exactly how our dollars are being spent across the community. It's really, at this point, the only way that we can figure out to ensure that the dollars are being dispersed equitably. And so those are new questions on our application and our final report. But by the time folks have gotten to the final report, we kind of know what they're going to say.
Makes sense. Something you just spoke about, Danielle, was the importance of multi-year grants and how some of those processes might be different than when you're just doing something within one funding cycle. So I'm curious if you can speak a little bit more on that for our listeners.
Sure. So multi-year grants have existed for the Columbus Foundation for a while, but I will say that it's not an effort that we had maximized until very recently. We're looking very much forward to the opportunity to expand our multi-year grant making offering. And we think it's an important part of that capacity building piece. So not just providing a grant for 1 year, for a specific program, but really looking at what makes our community whole and how do we fund those things. What organizations really are providing that safety net for our community members, and how do we just get in there and be a part of the safety net? And that is through multi-year grants. So the application for the current offerings is once every 3 years. You apply, there's a yearly check-in, and then at the end of the 3rd year, there's a reporting period. And I am very excited for those offerings to expand in coming years.
Yeah, I think those are fantastic because they really allow you to adopt on both sides for grant seekers and grant makers a long-term vision towards how you guys see your community, which sometimes can get lost when you're just looking for short-term funding opportunities. Speaking of which, I know that we spoke about this before the interview today about how important it is for us to reassess or reevaluate how where philanthropy's responsibility is in the nonprofit sector. So I'd love for you to speak a little bit more on that, since I thought we had a really interesting discussion there that our listeners would really appreciate hearing your thoughts on.
Sure. So my professional background is in social work. And so I'm keenly aware of the fact that our nonprofits are the folks who are really driving real community change and really holding up the community. And while philanthropy has a part to play in that, we certainly are not the star of the show. And I am excited about the fact that we are able to make grants truly as partners to nonprofits who have their hands and feet in the work every single day. And so I think our responsibility in philanthropy is to be a partner and to really work on taking down, dismantling that power structure that has existed for, centuries, and sharing that power with our community members, both the nonprofits that we have as grantees and also the clients that those nonprofits are serving, to make sure that that's an equal playing field for all parties. I think it's philanthropy's responsibility at this point to do that as the partner that quote unquote has the power, because we have historically held the wealth. It's our responsibility to start sharing that power.
That's a great message. And I think your foundation's approach towards that is so evident in terms of its true nature, in that you support all of the open houses to support accessibility, you support all the nonprofit center resources. Those are all efforts, and having boots on the ground, really, it seems to be a central theme for you guys as well. And hopefully, if there's any grant makers also listening to this, they can potentially reach out and learn more from you guys and the example that you guys are setting. I'm curious if you have any final thoughts for our listeners that you think might be helpful to share to help out the grant seekers that are listening today.
Well, final thoughts, I think, would be, my first final thought is truly thank you to all of the organizations that are listening, that are in our communities all over the country, truly doing the work that needs to be done. Thank you so much for doing that, doing things that many people can't do. And thank you for allowing us in philanthropy to be a part of that work in any way that we can. The message that I think I'd love to send, and I can only speak for the Columbus Foundation, is please don't be afraid to engage with us. We loved the connection. I think that our team is really, we're extroverts, and I think that's helpful. We love the connection, and that really helps us do our best work, because as you've emphasized, for us, it's about matching the community need more so than the application process. So please don't be afraid to reach out. That helps us do our jobs.
Awesome. And Danielle, what is the best way for folks to reach out to the Columbus Foundation?
Oh, there's a bunch of different ways to reach out. So we've talked about the grant open houses. You can feel free to do that. We've talked about the nonprofit forums. That's a way to connect with us. You can email us. We have a generalized contact us box, which gets directly to me and my team. So if you email the contact us, we get this email that says somebody's looking for an answer to this question, and one of me and my 6 team members, one of us will be an expert on that. So we'll get back to you that way. You can always call. I will say calling is harder because we are still hybrid. So we may not always be as next to the phone as necessary, but what we do is schedule appointments with you if we need a longer conversation. So you can pick your way you'd like to reach out. It will work for us.
Awesome. Pick your own adventure with Columbus Foundation. Again, their website is columbusfoundation.org. There's no "the" before that. And you can reach out to Danielle and her team from there. Danielle, thank you so much for being on today and for speaking to all of our listeners.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a delight.
This concludes our conversation with Danielle Tong, the Community Research and Grants Management Officer at the Columbus Foundation. If you enjoyed this interview with this grant maker, be sure to check out our other ones in this series. And if you haven't already, create your Instrumentl account to get personalized grant recommendations for your nonprofit. Just access www.instrumentl.com to get your results today.